All right, so by the end of this panel, we will be crowning a winner of the Scooter Wars. So so do your best. No pressure, though. No pressure. Yeah, so obviously this big news actually happened in your world in this last month, Katie. Is that another Amber Alert, possibly? That is unfortunate. So, Katie, Bird bought Scoot, which was kind of pretty big news in the micromobility space. I know that you said you're not really able to talk too much about like what that means for Scoot, but does this kind of signal the beginning of consolidation in the scooter space, do you think?
I think there was a lot of talk and written about this is the year of consolidation, and this is clearly a signal of one direction this could go. I think it makes a lot of sense for these two companies in particular to come together. Bird has scaled in an incredible way in the past year and a half. Scoot has been around operating in a few strategic cities for many years and is multimodal and has built really strong relationships with city governments, and there's strategic reasons for us to come together, and we're really excited to kind of bring our unique skills and bring micromobility to more cities around the world. Does it signal consolidation for the whole industry? I think there's still a lot of room for different operators in different cities. What we found in our experience at Scoot is every market is super unique because we are operating physical assets on the ground. It's not just about creating a marketplace and matching supply and demand. It's also about occupying public space and being kind of a productive contributor to a city's mobility solutions. And I think that there's a lot of small operators in Europe, in Latin America, and in the US that are offering something unique, and there's going to be a space for them. And the question will really be about how it's funded. And for Bird and Scoot, there was an opportunity to kind of leverage our resources by bringing the two companies together.
And Nick, I mean, you have some experience with this. Uber, of course, bought Jump. I guess it was early last year.
That's right.
Do you have any advice for Katie? You know, like being sold to another company that was once a competitor?
Yeah, I mean, we were really excited to join Uber because it was at a moment where we recognized that this was actually a dramatically larger opportunity and problem than really any startup is equipped to handle. I will say that the experience of taking off on a micromobility rocket ship as you scale something like we did to being huge globally is incredibly fun and an amazing learning experience that also takes an enormous amount of energy, but is just, I think, the way this whole industry needs to scale as we realize that really this problem should be solved with more rigor than building cars are solved with or deploying nationwide train systems are solved with, and that's the kind of solutions that you can bring when you're part of a much larger company.
Yeah, so I don't know about everyone else in the audience, but to me, a lot of these scooters kind of look and feel the same. And honestly, partly that's probably because Tony, your company, supplies a lot of these providers with those exact same scooters. How did you end up in that position? Like, well, congratulations, because you must be making a ton of money. But how'd you kind of like become the scooter provider?
I think we are fortunate in a way that we had a little bit head start. So having our supply chain based in China have some advantage in terms of having the capacities and also a lot of the sort of engineering supply chain know-how were based in China. So we have a little bit head start. And the other thing is the micromobility kind of movement. In a way, it started with bicycles, right? If you look at the Ofo and Mobike. So we had like a couple of years of head start in this whole the dockless business model, and also kind of the biggest testing ground in China. So we kind of benefit from that. And also, we were able to see almost like 3 or 4 years ago that scooter form factor is really sort of the ultimate form factor for consumers that time. So we were able to ramp up productions, and obviously with our partnership with Xiaomi and some other partners, we were able to be the sort of leader in this scooter business to begin with. So we had a little bit of learning curve behind us. So essentially the head start helped quite a bit. But of course, to maintain that leadership is actually quite challenging as well. So we can talk all about that.
Yeah, because I mean, now you see more companies are actually deciding to build their own scooters in-house. And Shalin, I know that Skip is actually coming out with a new scooter. I believe it's next month. How did you kind of think about that product and more importantly, making it different from what's already out there?
Yeah, it's a great question. First, I want to acknowledge what's been a tremendous, fruitful partnership with Segway Nonbot. Clearly has done amazing things in the industry and has helped a ton of the operators bootstrap services that have helped with the last mile transportation problem in a bunch of cities. We believe that building the best product certainly starts with the scooter. And the learnings we've had in operating in Washington, D.C., Portland for a bit, San Francisco, of course, recently launched in Austin and San Diego, are that we have to put the rider first. And that means when we think about reliability, longevity, depreciation, theft and vandalism, a whole bunch of the things we'll talk about, especially when it comes to unit economics, of course, but also for the rider and their interaction with the scooter, we need to rethink the scooter from the ground up. So we have been working on our custom-built scooter, custom-designed scooter. It is, we tweeted it probably a month or two ago, but we're excited to announce that we're going to be rolling it out in the next month or two in a test program in San Francisco. We'll have about 50 scooters on the ground. It's going to be an integrated lock-2 mechanism. We'll have swappable batteries, standard things that a lot of the folks are working on, wider baseboards, larger wheels, bigger headlights, et cetera, et cetera. But the point is, a lot of our focus with this iteration of the next scooter and future ones is how do we put the rider front and center.
Well, and could we actually just bring up the photo of that scooter? Is it cool? Yeah, there it is. So, yeah, I don't know if you all can see, but it looks like so the swappable battery is just kind of sitting next to the scooter, and then it kind of from the baseboard folds up, and that's where the battery lives.
That's right.
Yeah. And so, why swappable batteries? Is that useful in terms of improving unit economics?
Yeah, there's a couple answers to that. I think, of course, first and foremost, to make the business work, it doesn't make sense for these scooters to be removed from the road for a portion of the day, charged in someone's home, and then put back out several hours later. That is basically the model that many of the operators, including ourselves, have gone with. If we can leave these scooters out on the streets longer, of course, make sure that the scooters are stronger, more robust, more reliable. But also, the key thing is being able to swap in the batteries in and out. It means for riders, these scooters are more available. And that is one of the biggest holdups right now, I would say, across the board, is the fact that when riders want to use micromobility options and scooters, they're just not around. And so swappable batteries, in my mind, is really about solving that problem.
And will these be user swappable? So I could go up to a scooter, I find that it's dead, and then I go somewhere and I find a battery, or am I like carrying a battery around with me in my backpack, or how does that work?
Megan, we'd happily sign you up to be one of our battery swappers, in case you're looking for another role. It's an interesting question. Honestly, we don't know the answer to that. We're going to be experimenting with a lot of different models, with our rangers, with our operations team, to see what works. But certainly, there is a role for bringing our riders into how we think about positioning of our fleet and incentivizing them in the right ways.
Oh, yeah, Katie.
Scoot has been using swappable batteries for our electric mopeds since we launched in San Francisco in 2012, and we have had a lot of success kind of getting our customers to do work for us. So about 20 to 30% of our batteries get swapped by our operations team in the field, and the rest of the time we'll incentivize riders to end their ride in a garage and plug in the battery for a discounted ride. So we found kind of a hybrid model where we can swap out the batteries so we don't have to bring the scooters back to a central location so they can stay in the field, but also finding the right price point and distance and location where your customers will actually kind of be eager and willing to help charge has saved us money and enabled our scooters to be more available.
And yeah, we unveiled our bike user swappable system last month that in the coming months will be seen used across multiple electric vehicle types. But it really does come back to enabling users to make sure their vehicles are charged all of the time really drives up the availability of the system and what the reliability of that whole transportation experience can be, which is great for the unit economics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just on the subject of unit economics, I mean, what is the, what's the hardest part about achieving good unit economics? Is it, or what gets in the way? Is it theft? Is it vandalism? Is it just that these scooters are just not made to be shared? What is it that's making it so hard?
I would say, maybe slightly provocatively and slightly from the future, that unit economics are a solved problem. And I'm going to say that because I know with certainty that all of the problems that we're trying to solve are actually not unsolved problems. And they're not incredibly hard problems in other industries. It's just, this is a big transportation network that we're building. And our approach, really excitingly, has been to pull hundreds of the best people from automotive and consumer electronics and the light EV industry to solving these problems rigorously. And not only do I think it's important to know that they are solvable, I think it's actually important to not treat unit economics as a boogeyman in this conversation, because it actually sort of deters cities from treating this like a long-term transportation solution that they should start reorienting their street space around. If there's a fear that the business isn't going to work and these companies are just all going to disappear in the next year, of course we shouldn't be taking over streets from cars for micromobility. Those are the real product changes that actually will drive sustainable unit economics as well, because we know that really the best thing you can do for unit economics is increase your fleet sizes so you can get economies of scale and get your entire city population using the vehicles. And to do those, you need to have really big fleets and you need to have safe streets so that everybody wants to engage with the vehicles. The things like theft and reliability and range and easy operations, very hard, very fun problems, but just incredibly solvable problems in a reasonably short timeline, short years versus decades.
Yeah. I know in San Francisco, both Skip and Scoot, the two scooter companies in the city, found kind of early on that there were some issues around theft and vandalism. Nick just said those are very solvable problems. Have you solved them?
A thing we did really early on, because we learned really quickly how our scooters would not last long without some more kind of product investment, was add locks, infrastructure locks to our scooters. So again, that's kind of asking our customers to do a bit more work and be part of the kind of community and ensure that the next person can find the vehicle and use it. That had a huge impact on our theft rate, but it also had an impact on ridership. It's adding friction to the customer experience, which as a product person is usually not the way we want to develop products. So it's been a kind of interesting challenge to balance both kind of the operational side and the customer side of product development. The other really nice impact that the infrastructure locks have had is ensuring that people park in an orderly fashion. So if you have to lock the scooter at the end of your ride, then you can't just leave it strewn cone in the middle of the sidewalk where someone wouldn't be able to pass. And we ask every rider to snap a picture at the end of their ride so that we know that they've locked it properly. So that's one investment that we've used to address theft and vandalism. I think the other longer term thing that we're all investing in is just like sturdier scooters that like we've had success with our mopeds. Basically, the parts don't have much of a resale value. So just making them kind of less appealing to steal in the first place. And really just encouraging our community of riders to also kind of be on the lookout. We've partnered with the police in each of the cities that we operate in so that they're also working to kind of deter people from abusing the scooters and making everyone feel like it's a privilege to have them in your city.
Yeah, Shalin, has theft and vandalism gotten better, or like, is it not as bad as it used to be?
Look, for anyone who's lived in San Francisco will tell you, no, it's only getting worse. So apparently San Francisco has one of the highest, if not the highest, per capita property crime rate in the US. So theft and vandalism, they're not going away anytime soon, let's be honest. But really our approach is you can't completely eliminate it, but we can do many things to mitigate it. And there's building upon what was already said. We've taken a lot of the similar approaches to mitigate the problem in San Francisco. One of the approaches as well is keeping a very strong local operations that is sweeping the streets and making sure that any scooters that we detect are in unsafe conditions, or the vehicles are alerting to us that, hey, something's happening. We're deploying folks to recover those scooters. And that for us has been met with a lot of success in actually being able to recover the full vehicle. But having said that, theft and vandalism is a big problem in San Francisco. It's a highly variable one per city from what we've seen. So what theft and vandalism means in SF is very different from other markets. So we're learning, we're iterating, and experimenting with a whole ton of things.
Yeah, and I mean, so there's been a growing conversation around the idea of ownership versus the shared model, and which model is more sustainable. Tony, maybe it's both.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. A little bit interesting development for us is this year we actually see tremendous growth on the retail side. And I think one of the reasons behind that is thanks to the scooter sharing business is actually educating the market about the form factor of kick scooters, electric kick scooters. So we see growth in actually all kind of countries, developed nations or developing nations as well. And partially, it is almost like a vacuum in this market where people has been thinking, almost equating the micromobility device to bicycles for the longest time. So essentially, kick scooter is kind of a surprise to a lot of the people, for consumers. So when they see the form factor and they see how easy to use, and actually, honestly, they see how cheap they are compared to some of the expensive, the bicycles are way more expensive than electric scooters. And naturally, they would think, okay, maybe just buy one for myself. So you actually can see them in even public transit. San Francisco, there's a lot of people carrying their own scooters too. So not only that, we see this sort of tragedy of the common problem with shared scooter. It doesn't really exist for the own scooters, right? This is your own personal property. You would definitely take care of it. So personally, I would predict that eventually the ownership of a kick scooter will increase, especially with new development in the product. So for example, we believe that this is almost like early days of automobile or early days of iPhone, where in the beginning every kick scooter would look alike. But eventually, we'll have kick scooters for ladies, for example, different color, different, maybe lighter weight, for even younger folks, and perhaps more stronger, more fun to ride for bigger boys. So the diversification on the retail side, we will see that kind of diverge from the shared scooter designs as well. And so the shared scooters is mostly commercial use, and we're gonna focus on sort of total cost of ownership, and also efficiencies for operations. And so they're getting bigger and they're more comfortable, right, and more durable, but they also become much uglier compared to the lighter and prettier ones.
I don't know about that.
Yeah. I'm sure that the jump scooters, I see the scooters are very well built. So I think they will be much better design in the future for sure. So yeah.
I think sharing executed well is private ownership with this magical feature of the vehicle disappearing when you don't want it and teleporting to you when you do want it. And that's going to be really hard to compete with. But actually, honestly, at the same time, I think both categories are going to grow just ridiculously from voraciously stealing market share from private car ownership. So we don't, I think, need to argue about that one too much.
Yeah, I'll add on to that. I think if we reframe what competition here is, it's not about shared versus ownership. They're serving different jobs to be done. There's a lot of people, commuters especially, who need better last mile transportation solutions, whether it's jump bikes, it's scooters, and a multitude of other form factors. And that's where, to solve that problem, ownership model makes a lot of sense. Having said that, there is a lot of customer needs around ad hoc use cases, doing ad hoc trips, meeting up with a friend, visiting town. I'm at the DC National Mall or Embarcadero of San Francisco, that honestly you're not thinking about, oh, hey, let me buy a scooter so I can do that thing in this new city. But we see a lot of traction in this form factor with scooters for that job to be done. So it really depends on that, and I think both will be, like Nick said, tremendously successful.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like a lot of you are in agreement that there's space for both. There's space for people to own their own scooters, and there's also space for people to share them, and like.
There's a lot more space if we reprioritize parking.
Yeah, and let's definitely get into that in a second. But and so Bird, they that company, your new overlord, they are starting to sell scooters directly to consumers. So like they're doing shared and they're doing direct to consumer. Shalin, do you envision Skip ever exploring just direct to consumer as well?
I wouldn't put it out of the long-term strategy, but we're really focused, being a small company, on nailing the shared model for residents in the cities we serve.
Okay. All right, Nick. Now back to the policy stuff. Yeah. So, and we were talking a little bit about this backstage, but just how like for me, I think scooters are really fun. I think bikes are great, but it's scary to be on them in cities where there are cars zooming by. And so what do you think needs to happen at the city level in order to really facilitate micromobility and its growth?
I think there are a ton of like really compelling policy wonky things that can and need to happen, but I actually think it's really simple and immediately actionable. We just need to ban cars from streets and urban cores and make them micromobility only.
Simple.
Super simple.
So ban all cars.
Well, privately owned vehicles for sure. There's some like shared ride hailing that can serve a lot of trips in that area. But that's ultimately what it needs to be, is that you need to be able to get on one of these vehicles, micromobility vehicles, and just feel safe and embraced by the city. And we should be building our cities to support that, because I fundamentally believe that micromobility is going to be the transportation revolution of the 21st century, and it is going to change how cities are built, just the way cars did. And there's nothing that's stopping us from doing that really, really quickly. And Everything short of that is great progress that matters. Building out bike lanes matters. Making people aware of micromobility matters. But the big changes are actually so simple and clear. It's just we need to prioritize these vehicles and the space for these vehicles versus this weird sort of socialist experiment of subsidizing privately owned cars in public spaces and cities, which when you pull it apart just doesn't make sense from a ton of angles.
Yeah, and do you envision the bikes and scooters and other micromobility vehicles all being in? Let's say the cars aren't going to go away. Do you envision them being in? There's like a separate bike lane, a separate scooter lane, a separate one-wheel lane, a separate electric skates lane, just like all of that, or just all kind of crammed into one lane?
I think everybody who thinks about this problem tends to converge towards separating by speed and mass, and that's just a pretty reasonable way of doing it because it's all about really about like collision force effectively, like how dangerous is it if these different vehicle types hit each other. So just lanes dedicated for smaller, lighter, slightly slower vehicles, although honestly there's really no reason anybody in any vehicle in a city should be going faster than 25, right? It just shouldn't be. But yeah, and then keeping that separate from pedestrians, obviously, because unless you're going 3 miles an hour, you probably shouldn't be around pedestrians. And that sounds really crazy, but actually, if you approach it without any biases, it's just the kind of obvious thing that you would want to do.
Yeah. And I also just wanted to quickly touch on scooters for two people. So I guess, yeah, so Bird is doing that. They announced their like two-seater that's kind of this like hybrid bike and scooter. I know there's actually one here with 2 handlebars, and that essentially just got me thinking, like, I oftentimes do see more than one person on these electric scooters. So instead of like having people risk their lives, like maybe just build for that. Like, is that something that any of you are thinking about?
We have a 2-person moped in Barcelona today, and we knew if we were going to launch a vehicle in Europe, it had to support 2 people because that's how people are used to getting around the city, and they would do it anyway. And we also see it illegally in San Francisco, and so it covers so many more use cases, both in terms of just social riding and fun and being with friends. It's easier than having to find 2 scooters near each other if only one's available. And then also really practical, dropping people off where they need to be. I think there's more questions around safety and accountability, and do you need to know the identities of both people who are riding, and making sure that we can do it in a responsible way. But there's many different directions of form factors that would cover more use cases in cities for people, as Tony was saying, with kind of different needs and desires. And I think a 2-person vehicle makes a lot of sense.
Cool. Well, we're unfortunately out of time, but I do think it's pretty clear who the winner is. So yeah, thanks for having us.